Former presidential candidate John Edwards found not guilty on one of 6 campaign fraud charges today, but the jury couldn't reach a verdict on the other counts, leading the judge to declare a mistrial on those counts. Edwards was accused of orchestrating a plan to use money from 2 wealthy donors in order to hide his pregnant mistress during his 2008 bid for the White House. Not immediately clear whether prosecutors would try to retry Edwards on those other counts. The acquittal and mistrials capped a day of confusion. The judge mistakenly believed the jurors had reached a verdict on every count earlier in the day. They hadn't. Edwards spoke outside the courthouse less than an hour ago.
I want to make sure that everyone hears from me and from my voice that while I do not believe I did anything illegal or ever thought I was doing anything illegal, I did an awful lot that was wrong. And there is no one else responsible for my sins. None of the people who came to court and testified are responsible. Nobody working for the government is responsible. I am responsible. And if I want to find the person who should be held accountable for my sins, honestly, I don't have to go any further than the mirror. It's me. It is me and me alone. I don't think God's through with me. I really believe He thinks there's still some good things I can do. And whatever happens with this legal stuff going forward, what I'm hopeful about is all those kids that I've seen, you know, in the poorest parts of this country and in some of the poorest places in the world, that I can help them in whatever way I'm still capable of helping them. And I want to dedicate my life to being the best dad I can be and to helping those kids who I think deserve help and who I hope I can help.
All right, let's talk a little bit about John Edwards. And to do that, we're going to bring in tonight's panel. We begin, as we almost always do, with Dominic Carter, political journalist and author. Brad Gersman is with us tonight. He is a political consultant, as is good friend Tom Doherty. Brad, good friend also. Tom, a political strategist and former advisor to Republican Governor George Pataki. All right, this guy could have been president. He was, you know, a front runner at various points throughout. You agree with the outcome today, and you want to see more charges against him?
I don't know if he could have ever been president. I mean, he was on the ticket for number 2, but I don't know about president. I mean, he was smooth, and he had a message of representing the poor, and it was a good message, but I don't know about going to the top. The verdict does not surprise me at all. It was a conflict, it appears, with the jury. They never seemed to fully understand or as a full unit what was a contribution or what may have been a financial gift. So it doesn't surprise me at all.
I mean, I think it's the right call. I think that, listen, the guy has suffered public humiliation upon public humiliation that he brought upon himself. He deserved all of it. This was clearly, you know, listen, he had more than enough money to take care of a mistress, a baby, a girlfriend. It wasn't like he needed campaign dollars to go do it. He clearly wanted to hide it from his former wife. And so I think, you know, we move on. He got some bad press, and we'll remember him as a real jerk.
Yeah, and I hate prosecutions like this. I agree. I'm glad this has gone the way it has. I hope prosecution chooses not to retry this case. It's another waste of taxpayer dollars. You know, John Edwards is what he is. We've all realized that. Not a nice guy, but certainly not a criminal in this particular instance.
And he's going to go down in history alongside the Elliot Spitzers and the other politicians who have just really done some scuzzy stuff in their personal life. So,
if he goes down in history at all.
Well, I'm sure he will. If only with an asterisk. Asterisk, Brad, if only with an asterisk. All right, we're going to move on now to what we intended to lead tonight's show with, and that is President Bush's visit to the White House. 3 presidents from 2 different parties, all at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue today, but enough of that. Today was all about bipartisanship. It's a tradition that dates back to the nation's first president, and today former President George W. Bush and his wife Laura Bush made a rare visit to their former home for the unveiling of their official White House portraits.
It now starts and ends with a George W.
The former president has largely stayed out of the political spotlight since he left the White House, but today he seemed to relish being back at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. President Bush recounted the story of how in 1814, Dolly Madison saved the portrait of George Washington before the British set fire to the White House.
Now, Michelle, if anything happens, there's your man.
I promise. I'm going straight for
Along with the laughter, and there was a lot of it, there were emotional moments as well, when Mr. Bush thanked his father, former President George H.W. Bush.
I am honored to be hanging near a man who gave me the greatest gift possible, unconditional love. And that would be number 41.
President Obama frequently blames his predecessor for the messes he inherited.
Tax cuts for folks who didn't need them and weren't even asking for them.
And though Mr. Obama mentioned the 2008 economic crisis and the killing of Osama bin Laden, today was devoid of partisanship.
We may have our differences politically, but the presidency transcends those differences.
All right, so President Bush back at the White House today. It was interesting to see him back there. We have not seen a lot of former President Bush over the last couple of years. We are certainly not going to see too much of George W. Bush between now and Election Day. And this got me thinking because, you know, I think most people, guys, if you ask them who would be able to, would Bush's policies have seen the country through over the last 3 years, considering the crisis where we were and where we've had to rebound from, I'm sure most people would have less confidence in George W. Bush than other options. What's the difference between Bush and Romney when it comes to economic policy? And Tom, I'm going to pick on you first here as the Republican at the table, but I don't see a lot of difference between George W. Bush's economic policies and what Mitt Romney is pitching.
Well, I mean, I don't think you see a lot. I think you see a lot of difference between what Republicans generally believe and what Democrats generally believe. I think that Republicans, being Bush, Romney, generally believe that we need to spend less money in this country. We need to have lower tax rates in this country and create jobs in that particular manner. You know, so I think that, you know, if you looked at the Bush problem, as it turned out, was more of a problem, I think, of blame that could go across the board, you know, whether it was Fannie, Sally, Freddie, et cetera, et cetera. It wasn't just one simple Bush spent too much money and dug us a hole. Because if that was the case, I mean, you know, this president has spent more money than any president in history. So I think your question's a little bit misleading because I think they're carrying it out.
What about the Clinton years? And the country was doing so well financially.
You know, see, Dominic, I think that, listen, none of us sitting at this table are economic majors, and there's not an economic major or philosopher in this country who's yet to figure this all out. But it seems that, you know, many, many times you can make the argument that Clinton really benefited from the Bush 1 tax hikes. And, you know, Reagan thus, you know, the same thing, you know, because of what Carter had gone through, the next president historically, the economics of it generally goes a little bit better for you.
Look, the economics, there's no question there's a cyclical, you know, movement to the economics. I thought the interesting question was going to be is, you know, how is George Bush similar in his economic approach to the current president, Barack Obama? Because, look, they're both very big spenders, okay? They both have continued on with the tax cuts.
All right, this may not be the fairest question I've asked, but let me show the presidential spending chart if we can. Because, Tom, you mentioned presidential spending and the difference between Democrats and Republicans. This is the spending increases per president. The red lines are Republican presidents. The blue lines are Democratic presidents. Right. Last 3 Democratic terms that we've had, less increase in spending as opposed to the Republican presidents.
And I'll give you the easy answer on that. There's a very simple answer to that, Andrew, and that's the following. If you look at the Reagan, in particular the Reagan spending increases, if you look at the Bush 2 spending increases, all driven by the military. When Carter left the White House, military spending was at record lows. The military was crippled, and you needed to come in the midst of a Cold War. Reagan said, listen, the way I'm going to deal with Russia is this is what I'm going to do. Bush, as you know, confronted 9/11, tremendous uptick in spending on that. If you look at the day-to-day spending, I think Bush was $6.6 billion per day. Under Obama, it is somewhere north of $9 billion.
Yeah, but let's be honest here. Just one thing is, and I agree 100%, Tom. But the messaging is that Democrats spend more money than Republicans. The truth is Republicans spend more money on things they like military, and the Democrats spend more money on things that they like social services.
Absolutely.
And at the end of the day, both parties spend a lot of money.
You're talking about military spending, and we have 2 wars that have just ended, and we're expected to see those savings. Mitt Romney surrounding himself with neocon foreign policy experts, pushing for war in Syria, pushing for war in Iran. As long as we're going to go, tax cuts, the Bush tax cuts, which he put in, which were temporary, Mitt Romney wants to lower the top tax rate and make them permanent. There's also 3 Bush administration veterans on Romney's economic team. Yeah. You're talking about a Romney economic plan that would add $250 billion to the deficit over the last 10 years. Once again, what's the difference between Mitt Romney and George W. Bush?
I think that the difference is both of them wouldn't have Obamacare, which is the biggest stranglehold around the American people's neck in terms of deficit and spending over the next 2 generations of Americans.
But wouldn't they both continue to throw money at defense while social programs are cut to the bone?
Well, listen,
isn't that a Republican philosophy?
I quite frankly don't know why we're looking forward when maybe we should look back when Obama could have put his arms around his own debt commission report, which was a bipartisan commission that really would have solved a lot of these problems that we're confronting.
Why shouldn't we look at the options in front of us? Romney wants to lay out a plan for the next 4 years.
Why don't you spend the evening talking about why the incumbent president didn't do X, Y, and Z? Why didn't he do these type of activities that you're talking about in the 2 years that he controlled the House and the Senate?
People have had President Obama run as the president for the last 3.5 years. Right. People feel like they know President Obama. A lot of people don't know Mitt Romney. A lot of people don't know Mitt Romney's record. That was one of the reasons we wanted to bring it up tonight.
Okay.